What if a single act of kindness from your past returned to change your future? This is a remarkable true story of how a chance roadside encounter reconnected two lives that were destined to meet again. Watch until the end to discover how this powerful reunion transformed both their worlds forever. The sleek black Maserati glided down the rain-slicked highway, its tires hissing against the wet asphalt. Inside, 32-year-old tech mogul Elijah Morgan sat behind the wheel, his designer suit jacket casually tossed in the passenger seat. The countryside blurred past as he pushed the sports car faster, trying to outrun the storm, and perhaps his thoughts. 3 hours earlier, Elijah had walked out of a board meeting that would finalize his company's billion-dollar acquisition by a tech giant. It should have been his moment of triumph. Instead, he felt strangely empty. The wealth, the power, the success, it all seemed hollow somehow. 10 years of work, he muttered to himself. And for what? Lightning flashed, illuminating the lonely road ahead. In that brief white glare, Elijah spotted a figure at the roadside, an older man with a thumb out, shoulders hunched against the downpour. Elijah had never picked up a hitchhiker in his life. His security team would have a collective heart attack if they knew he was even considering it. Yet something made him ease off the accelerator. Perhaps it was a weariness in the man's stance, or the desolate stretch of highway with no town for miles. "What the hell?" he said and pulled over. The hitchhiker was in his 60s, with weathered skin and salt and pepper hair plastered to his forehead. His clothes were simple but neat, khaki pants and a blue button-down shirt now darkened with rain. He carried nothing but a worn leather satchel. "Thank you," the man said, climbing in. Not many folks would stop these days. "Where you headed?" Elijah asked, pulling back onto highway. "Pinewood. It's about 30 miles up this road." "I know it," Elijah said. He'd grown up in that small town before leaving for college, though he rarely mentioned this part of his past to anyone now. The old man studied him for a moment. "That's a kind coincidence. You from there?" "A long time ago," Elijah admitted, keeping his eyes on the road. They drove in silence for a few minutes, windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm against the rain. The stranger seemed content to watch the landscape, occasionally glancing at Elijah with a curious expression. "I'm Ray," the man finally offered. "Ray Daniels." The name hit Elijah like a physical blow. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You okay there?" Ray asked, noticing his reaction. "Fine," Elijah said quickly. "Just, the name sounded familiar." Ray nodded. "I taught high school in Pinewood for nearly 40 years. Math and science. Retired last year." Elijah's heart raced. It couldn't be. After all these years, after everything that had happened, this couldn't be the same Mr. Daniels who had changed the course of his life. The odds were astronomical. "Did you ever have a student named Elijah Morgan?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Ray's eyes widened slightly. He leaned forward, studying Elijah's face more intently. "Good Lord," he whispered. "Little Eli Morgan? Is that really you?" Elijah nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "It's been a while, Mr. Daniels." 18 years, Ray said softly. "You were 14 when you left town. Your mother had just—" He stopped abruptly. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought that up." "It's okay," Elijah said, though the old pain flickered briefly. "You remember me." "Of course I remember you," Ray said. "Brightest student I ever taught. And after what happened with those boys," he shook his head, "I've thought about you over the years, wonder where you ended up." Elijah almost laughed at the irony. "I doubt you picture me in this car." "The car doesn't matter," Ray said. "What matters is the man driving it." They were the exact words Ray had said to him all those years ago, the day that had altered Elijah's life forever. The day that 3 school bullies had cornered him behind the gym, intent on teaching the smart kid a lesson he wouldn't forget. The day Mr. Daniels had intervened, not just stopping the attack, but taking a confused, angry boy under his wing. For 6 crucial months before Elijah went to live with his aunt in another state, Ray Daniels had been his mentor, his advocate, the one adult who made him believe he could be more than his circumstances. And then life had torn them apart. "I never got to thank you," Elijah said quietly, "for everything you did for me." Ray waved a hand dismissively. You don't need to thank me. I was just doing my job. No, Elijah insisted. You went way beyond that. You tutor me after school every day. You lent me books. You convinced Principal Gardner to let me take advanced placement classes. You, his voice caught. You were there at my mother's funeral when nobody else was. The rain was easing now, patches of blue appearing between the clouds. Neither man spoke for a long moment. You know, Ray finally said, I always wondered if I'd made any difference. Teachings like that, you plant seeds, but you rarely get to see what grows from them. Elijah glanced at his former teacher. The man looked tired, older than his years. His clothes, while clean and presentable, were worn at the edges. His hands bore the slight tremor that comes with advancing age. You made all the difference, Elijah said. I built a tech company based on the programming concepts you taught me. Remember that old computer you salvaged from the school's trash? The one you let me take home. Ray smiled, a flash of pride crossing his face. I remember. You took it apart and put it back together in 2 days. I'd never seen anything like it. That was the beginning, Elijah said. Everything I've accomplished started with you believing in me. As they neared Pinewood, signs of economic struggle became evident. Shuttered businesses lined the main street. The factory that had once employed half the town now stood abandoned, its windows broken, walls covered in graffiti. Elijah slowed the car, taking the decline of his hometown. What happened here? He asked. Same thing that happened to a lot of small towns. Ray sighed. The factory closed 10 years ago. Young people left for better opportunities. Those who stayed struggled. The school's half the size it used to be. Elijah frowned. And you? Why did you stay? Someone had to, Ray said simply. These kids need teachers who care, maybe now more than ever. But you said you retired. From full-time teaching, yes. Now I run a free after-school program for at-risk kids. We meet in the old library building. I teach math, science, computer skills, whatever they need. He smiled wryly. Not that we have much in the way of computers. Most of what we use is donated, outdated stuff. Elijah felt something shift inside him, a purpose taking shape where emptiness had been just hours before. All these years he'd built his fortune, his empire, never looking back at the place that shaped him, never thinking about the man who would save him when he needed saving most. Where should I drop you? He asked as they entered the town limits. The corner of Maple and Pine will do, Ray said. My house is just a short walk from there. As Elijah pulled to the curb, Ray extended his hand. It was good to see you, Elijah. You turned out well. Elijah took the offered hand, then made a split-second decision. Would you have coffee with me tomorrow, Mr. Daniels? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Ray, the older man corrected. And yes, I like that very much. As Ray climbed out of the car, Elijah knew with absolute certainty that his impulsive detour had been no accident. The universe had brought him back to Pinewood for a reason. Back to the man who had once saved his life, and who might now give him the purpose he'd been searching for. He watched Ray walk away, then pulled out his phone. The billion-dollar acquisition could wait another day. He had a more important call to make first. The morning light painted Pinewood's main street in soft golden hues, revealing both its faded charm and visible struggle. Elijah parked his luxury car outside the only coffee shop still open downtown. The Daily Grind, a modest establishment with mismatched furniture and locals who turned to stare when he walked in. Ray was already waiting, seated at a corner table with 2 mugs. He dressed more formally today, as if meeting his former student was an occasion worthy of his better shirt and carefully combed hair. I took the liberty of ordering for you, Ray said as Elijah sat down. Black with 1 sugar, if I remember correctly. Elijah smiled, genuinely touched. You remember how I take my coffee from 18 years ago. Teachers notice things, Ray replied with a slight shrug, especially about the kids who need a little extra attention. The simple statement carried the weight of their shared history. How Ray had seen beyond the angry teenager with shabby clothes and a chip on his shoulder to potential underneath. So, Ray said, leaning forward, you mentioned something you wanted to discuss? Elijah nodded, gathering his thoughts. Before we get to that, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you years ago. He took a deep breath, the memories surfacing with unexpected clarity. The day you stopped those boys from beating me up behind the gym, it wasn't just another bullying incident. Ray's expression grew serious. I suspected as much. I'd been planning to end my life that night, Elijah said quietly, his voice steady despite the gravity of his words. My mom had just been diagnosed with terminal cancer. We had no money for treatment. Those boys had been tormenting me for months. I'd stolen pills from the pharmacy. I had it all planned out. Ray's hand trembled slightly as he set down his mug. Elijah, but then you stepped in. Not just that day, but every day after. You gave me a reason to keep going. You showed me I had value when I couldn't see it myself. Elijah met his former teacher's eyes. You didn't just help me, Mr. Daniels. You saved my life. Literally. The weight of this revelation settled between them, around them. The coffee shop hummed with morning conversations, oblivious to profound exchange taking place in their corner. I had no idea, Ray finally said, his voice rough with emotion. I knew you were struggling, but I never realized. How could you have known? I never told anyone, Elijah said, but that's why I needed to find you, to tell you that what you did mattered more than you could possibly have known. Ray blinked rapidly, composing himself. Thank you for telling me. In teaching, you never really know the full impact you have. Most of the time, we just have to trust that something we said or did made a difference. A young waitress approached to refill their cups. Elijah noticed her name tag, Sophia, and the textbook peeking from her apron pocket. Introduction to Computer Science. Are you studying computers? He asked conversationally. Her face brightened. Yes, at community college. I'm hoping to transfer to a 4-year program, but... She gestured vaguely at their surroundings. The implication clear. Dreams had practical limitations in places like Pinewood. Sophia is one of my former students. Ray explained proudly after she left. Brilliant with code. She reminds me of you at that age. Elijah watched her move efficiently between tables. How many others are there like her? Kids with potential but limited opportunities? Too many to count, Ray sighed. That's why I started the after-school program. It's small, woefully under-resourced, but it gives them somewhere to go, something to aspire to. I'd like to see it, Elijah said. An hour later, they stood in what had once been Pinewood's public library, now a community center housing Ray's after-school program along with other social services. The computer lab consisted of 8 outdated machines arranged on second-hand desks. We make do, Ray said, running his hand over one of the ancient monitors. The kids are creative with limited resources. Necessity and invention, you know? Elijah nodded, taking it all in. The space was clean but shabby, every item clearly salvaged or donated. Yet the walls were covered with student projects, science fair posters, engineering designs, coding flowcharts drawn by hand. It reminded him powerfully of his own childhood, working on that salvaged computer Ray had given him, dreaming of possibilities beyond Pinewood's boundaries. How many students do you work with? He asked. About 30 regularly. Could be more if we had the capacity. Ray hesitated, then added, most of them face challenges at home. Food insecurity, parents working multiple jobs, some in foster care. The kinds of circumstances that make academic achievement a secondary priority. Like me? Elijah said softly. Like you? Ray agreed. But also like you, they're resilient. They just need someone in their corner. As they talked, Elijah began to understand the true nature of Ray's work. It wasn't just academic enrichment. It was a lifeline, a safe harbor for kids navigating turbulent waters. Ray knew which students needed breakfast, who needed a quiet place to do homework, whose parents were struggling with addiction. He had created a space where dignity was preserved alongside opportunity. How do you fund all this? Elijah asked. Ray's laugh held little humor. My pension covers most of the rent. We get small grants here and there. The school district chips in what it can, which isn't much. The rest. He gestured to a jar labeled Computer Fund, on his desk, half filled with small bills and change. Elijah felt something stir within him, a clarity of purpose that had been missing despite all his material success. For years, he had built his tech empire with brilliant innovation, but no real direction beyond growth and profit. Here was Ray, with almost nothing, creating something with profound meaning. What would you do if resources were an issue? Elijah asked suddenly, if you had everything you needed for these kids? Ray looked surprised by the question. He sat down heavily in his chair, removing his glasses to clean them thoughtfully. Well, he began, his voice taking on a wistful quality. I'd start with proper computers, of course, a 3D printer, robotics kits. His pace quickened as he warmed to the subject. I'd hire tutors, maybe college students, to provide more one-on-one help. Create scholarship funds so kids like Sophia don't have to choose between education and paying rent. He replaced his glasses, his eyes bright with possibility. I'd expand beyond STEM, too. Art supplies, music equipment. Not every kid finds their path through science and math. Most importantly, I'd create a sustainable food program. It's hard to learn when you're hungry. Elijah listened, mentally calculating figures. His mind was already mapping out logistics, timelines, structures, the same skills he'd used to build his company, now finding a new purpose. What if we did all of that? He said quietly. Ray smiled sadly. A nice dream. No. Elijah leaned forward. I mean it. What if I funded everything you just described and more? Ray stared at him, uncomprehending. Elijah, that would cost millions. Elijah finished for him. I know. I can afford it. The older man's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. Are you saying? What exactly are you saying? I'm saying I want to create a foundation, Elijah explained, the idea crystallizing as he spoke, starting here in Pinewood, but eventually expanding to similar communities. Technology education, arts, food security, scholarships, everything you mentioned. He stood up, sudden energy propelling him to pace the small office. My company is being acquired. By this time tomorrow, I'll have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Money that would just sit in accounts or fund more technology that the world doesn't really need. Ray watched him, still looking stunned. This is a substantial commitment you're considering. It's not just about money, Elijah insisted. I want to be involved. I want to use what I've learned building my company to create something meaningful. Something that might have saved me if it had existed when I was 14. Outside the window, they watched as teenagers began arriving for the afternoon session, backpacks slung over shoulders, greeting each other with a complicated choreography of adolescent interaction. Each face held stories Elijah recognized: determination, weariness, hope, defiance. They deserve better than what this town can currently offer them, Ray said quietly. Yes, Elijah agreed, and we can give them that. But I need your help. Ray turned to him, eyebrows raised. My help? You're the billionaire with resources. And you're the teacher who knows what these kids actually need, Elijah countered. You're the one who's been in the trenches all these years while I've been chasing wealth and status. I need your wisdom, your experience, your heart. The afternoon light slanted through the dusty windows, illuminating the particles floating between them. Two men from different worlds, connected by shared history and newfound purpose. Partners? Elijah extended his hand. Ray hesitated only briefly before clasping it firmly. Partners. That evening, they sat in Ray's modest living room, surrounded by papers as they sketched out the framework for what would become the Morgan Daniels Foundation. Ray's extensive knowledge of educational needs, combined with Elijah's business acumen, created something neither could have developed alone. As midnight approached, Elijah noticed a framed photograph on Ray's bookshelf. A much younger Ray surrounded by students at a science fair. With a jolt, he recognized himself in the background, skinny and serious, standing beside a crude computer program display. I remember that day, he said, picking up the frame. My project on algorithmic efficiency. You drove me to the regional competition because Mom was too sick to take me. Ray nodded. You won first place. Beat out kids from schools with 10 times our resources. You kept us all these years? Of course, Ray said simply. It was one of my proudest moments as a teacher. Elijah studied the photograph more closely. In it, Ray wasn't looking at the winning projects or the judges. He was looking at his students, with an expression of such genuine pride and care that it made Elijah's throat tighten. This is what we need to replicate, he said softly. Not just the resources, but this belief in potential, this dignity you gave us. Ray nodded, understanding perfectly. Technology changes. Buildings change. But what young people need most remains constant. Someone who sees their value before they can see it themselves. As Elijah prepared to leave for his hotel, Ray walked him to the door. You know, the older man said, when you picked me up in that rainstorm, I thought it was just good luck. Now I'm not so sure. What do you mean? Maybe there are no accidents, Ray said thoughtfully. Maybe 18 years later, we both had something the other needed. You needed purpose. I needed resources. And those kids need both. Standing under the porch light, Elijah realized that for the first time since his company's success, he felt truly wealthy. Not because of the money in his accounts, but because he had found something infinitely more valuable, a way to transform his success into significance, guided by the very person who had made that success possible. Tomorrow, he said, we start changing lives. Ray smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. No, Elijah, we already have. The old gymnasium of Pinewood High School buzzed with energy it hadn't known in decades. Where once there had been peeling paint and outdated equipment, now stood rows of cutting-edge computers, 3D printers, and digital workstations. Above it all, a simple banner read, Morgan Daniels Foundation, building futures together. 6 months had passed since that rainy evening when fate had reunited teacher and student. 6 months of planning, renovating, recruiting, and most importantly, dreaming. What had begun as a chance encounter had blossomed into something neither man could have imagined alone. Elijah stood at the back of the room, watching Ray move among the students, offering guidance here, encouragement there. Though dressed in his customary button-down shirt and khakis, Ray carried himself with renewed vigor, his eyes bright with purpose. The weariness Elijah had first noticed seemed lifted, replaced by the passionate energy of a man who'd been given the tools to fulfill his life's mission. Mr. Morgan? A hesitant voice pulled Elijah from his observations. He turned to find Sophia, the waitress from the coffee shop, now dressed in a Morgan Daniels Foundation t-shirt that identified her as a peer mentor. The robotics team is ready for their demonstration, she said. They've been practicing all week. Elijah followed her to a corner where 5 teenagers huddled around what appeared to be a small automated device designed to sort recycling materials. Their faces reflected the familiar mixture of pride and nervousness that comes with presenting one's creation to the world. This is incredible work, Elijah said after their demonstration. Have you considered entering the state competition? The youngest team member, a girl no older than 13 with thick glasses and determined eyes, spoke up. We're already registered. Mr. Daniels says we have a real shot at winning. More than a shot, Ray said, joining them. These kids developed an algorithm that's more efficient than anything I've seen in commercial applications. The girl beamed, standing taller at Ray's praise. Elijah recognized himself in her expression, the transformative power being truly seen by someone who believes in your potential. As the event continued around them, Ray pulled Elijah aside. There's someone I'd like you to meet. He led Elijah to a quiet corner where a middle-aged woman waited. She wore the practical clothes of someone who worked with her hands, and her face showed the weather resilience of hard years. This is Maria Vasquez, Ray said. Her daughter Elena is in our computer science program. Maria extended her hand, her grip firm despite her obvious nervousness. Mr. Morgan, I want to thank you personally. Elena has always been smart, but until this program. She paused, collecting herself. We've struggled since her father left. I worked 2 jobs. There was never money for computers or special classes. She gestured toward a teenage girl working intensely at one of the coding stations. Now she talks about college. about becoming an engineer. She has a future she can see. The simple authenticity of her gratitude touched Elijah deeply. This wasn't about tax write-offs or positive PR. This was about real lives being transformed, one family at a time. Elena's talent is remarkable, he responded. But your support is what makes her success possible. Working 2 jobs, encouraging her dreams. That's a foundation everything else is built upon. Maria's eyes brightened at this acknowledgement. Most people only see what they're given to families like ours. They don't see what we contribute. That's something I'm learning, Elijah admitted. This foundation isn't charity. It's investment in potential that already exists. After Maria returned to watch her daughter's presentation, Elijah and Ray walked through the transformed space. Where once the foundation had seemed like Elijah's gift to Ray and the community, he now understood it was equally their gift to him. A reconnection to purpose, to community, to the parts of himself he left behind in his climb to wealth and success. I've been thinking, Elijah said as they paused by a window overlooking the town, about expansion. Ray raised an eyebrow. Already? We've barely gotten this location running smoothly. Not just more centers, Elijah clarified, though that's part of it. I'm talking about a comprehensive approach, connecting education with economic development, healthcare, housing stability. He pointed toward the abandoned factory that had once been Pinewood's economic heart. What if we transformed that space into a technology incubator? Create jobs, bring in investment. The foundation provides education, but the community needs an economic future to work toward. Ray studied him thoughtfully. You're not thinking small anymore. I learned from the best. Elijah smiled. You never just taught me math and science. You taught me to see systems, to look for root causes. And you're seeing Pinewood as a system now. Yes, these kids are brilliant, but what happens after they graduate? They leave for opportunities elsewhere, and the cycle of community decline continues. Elijah's voice grew passionate. But what if they could build their futures here? What if their talents could revitalize the very place that nurtured them? Ray leaned against the windowsill, considering. It would require substantial investment beyond what we've already committed. I'm prepared for that, Elijah said without hesitation. But more importantly, it would require community ownership. This can't be something imposed from outside. It has to grow from within. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the main floor, applause erupting as Elena Vasquez successfully demonstrated her team's software project. Her face glowed with the confidence that comes from achievement, her mother watching with tears of pride. That, Elijah said quietly, is what this is all about. Not just individual success, but what it represents for families, for generations. Later that evening, long after the students and parents had departed, Elijah and Ray sat in what had once been the school's neglected library, now transformed into a modern media center. Around them, shelves held books alongside digital resources, the walls decorated with student artwork and project displays. I never asked you, Ray said, breaking their companionable silence. Why did you come back to Pinewood that day? After all these years of success, what brought you down that particular highway in the rain? Elijah considered the question carefully. I'd just come from finalizing my company's acquisition. On paper, it was everything I'd worked for, wealth, recognition, influence. But I felt hollow. He traced patterns on the polished table surface. I think I was searching for something I'd lost along the way. Not deliberately, but gradually, connection, purpose, the part of myself that wanted to build things that truly mattered. And picking up a ragged old teacher in the rain help you find that? Ray's eyes twinkled. Not just any teacher, Elijah corrected. The teacher who once saw value in me when no one else did, including myself. Ray nodded slowly. There's a symmetry to it. You were at a crossroads then, and again now. Different circumstances, same essential question. What give a life meaning? Back then, you showed me it was possibility, Elijah said. Now I understand it's also about connection, using what I've gained to strengthen the communities that shaped me. Outside the window, Pinewood's main street was visible, its storefronts showing the first tentative signs of revival. A new cafe had opened across from the community center. The hardware store had expanded its hours. Small changes, but significant ones. We're just beginning, Ray said, following his gaze. Real transformation takes time. And persistence, Elijah added. Another lesson you taught me. The following morning, they held the Foundation's first community planning session. Rather than presenting a fully formed vision, Elijah and Ray invited local business owners, parents, teachers, and community leaders to help shape the Foundation's future direction. The town's mayor, a former classmate of Elijah's, opened a meeting with obvious skepticism. We've seen outside investors come through before, she said bluntly. They make promises, take tax incentives, and leave when profits don't materialize quickly enough. That's a fair concern, Elijah acknowledged. But I'm not an outside investor. I grew up here. My mother is buried here. And I'm not looking for quick returns. I'm looking for sustainable change. Why should we trust you? Asked an older man Elijah recognized as the owner of the local hardware store. You left for 18 years without looking back. The question stung with its accuracy. Elijah had indeed left Pinewood behind, rarely thinking a community that had shaped his early years. Success had been a singular focus, with little regard for what or who he'd left behind. You're right, he admitted. I did leave, and I didn't look back. That was my mistake, and one I'm working to rectify now. But more importantly, this isn't about trusting me. It's about creating partnerships where everyone has a voice and a stake in the outcomes. Ray stepped forward. Many of you have known me for decades. You know I wouldn't be part of something that wasn't authentic. This foundation isn't about Elijah Morgan swooping in to save Pinewood. It's about creating conditions where Pinewood can save itself. The conversation that followed was honest, sometimes heated, but ultimately productive. Community members spoke of needs beyond education, affordable housing, healthcare access, living wage jobs. Elijah listened more than he spoke, absorbing the complex realities of a town struggling to redefine itself in a changing economy. By day's end, they had formed working groups focused on different aspects of community development, each led by local residents with foundation support. The Morgan Daniels model was evolving from educational initiative to comprehensive community transformation, not through top-down solutions, but through collaborative problem-solving. As Elijah prepared to return to his corporate responsibilities the following day, he and Ray walked through the quiet streets of Pinewood one last time. What do you see now when you look at this town? Ray asked. Elijah considered. I used to see only limitation, what Pinewood lacked, what it couldn't provide. Now I see possibility, not just what it could become, but what it already is at its core. A community of people with dignity, resilience, and tremendous untapped potential. That's the most valuable lesson I could have taught you, Ray said quietly. To see beyond surface circumstances to the inherent worth of every person, every place. They passed the spot where Ray had been standing in the rain 6 months earlier, thumb extended in hope of a ride. The confluence of timing, decision, and chance that brought them together again seemed almost mystical in retrospect. Do you believe in fate? Elijah asked suddenly. Ray chuckled. I believe in mathematics, science, and human connection. But I'll admit, the probability of our paths crossing again exactly when they did defy simple calculation. Maybe some equations are too complex for us to solve, Elijah suggested. Or maybe, Ray countered, the simplest explanation is sometimes the correct one. That people who profoundly impacted each other remain connected across time and circumstance in ways we don't fully understand. As they reached Ray's modest home, Elijah felt a completeness he hadn't known in years. His life had come full circle, not ending where it began, but rather spiraling to a new level of understanding and purpose. The frightened, angry boy had become a successful man, and now that success had found its meaning. When I was 14, Elijah said, you saved my life by showing me there was more to me than my circumstances. Now you've done it again by showing me there's more to success than wealth and achievement. We saved each other, Ray replied simply. That's how community works. 1 year later, the abandoned factory reopened as the Pinewood Innovation Center, housing tech startups, vocational training programs, and community services under one roof. Elena Vasquez, now heading to college on a Morgan Daniels scholarship, had helped design the building's advanced environmental systems. Her mother, Maria, managed the center's community cafe, providing employment opportunities for local residents. The foundation had expanded to 3 additional communities, each adapting the model to local needs and strengths. What had begun as a chance roadside encounter had catalyzed a movement of community-led transformation, bridging the gap between individual potential and collective prosperity. And at the heart of it all remained 2 men from different worlds, united by a shared belief in the power of seeing possibility, where others saw only limitation. Their story served as a living testament to the ripple effect of compassion, how a single act of kindness could return years later, multiplied beyond measure, creating waves of change that transformed not just individual lives but entire communities. In saving each other, they had discovered a truth as profound as it was simple, that the true measure of wealth lies not in what we acquire, but in what we enable others to become.